Good morning, class, and welcome to today's animal theme day or bring your pet day. I don't have a pet, so I turned myself into a pet. Luckily, I just watched The Tiger King, so I became a tiger, and I still have some wizarding powers that you guys gave me a few years back. And check it out, I can actually wiggle my ears now. Or pretty cool, huh? But anywho, I do want to say that the pajama winners, it was everybody. You guys all deserve a prize, and we did have some late entries, so I do want to share with you those late entries, and I will go ahead and show you guys the entries for the Christmas photos. So here are some of the late entries from yesterday's pajama day. So some of the late submissions was Wendy taking her selfie in her pajamas. We also had Destiny, who submitted a photo of her in her pajamas. And last but not least, we had the one and only Lil C's. So thank you guys for submitting your pajama photos. So for all you pajama contestants, I will give you guys a prize as soon as we get back to school. If we don't get back to school, then I will have to give you guys a prize some way, somehow. But thank you guys for submitting. And now let's move on to our Christmas submissions. First up, we have Carolyn. Love the spirit and thank you for the inspiration on making my own Santa photo. We have Alina showing off her Mickey Mouse gingerbread ears with the Christmas lights in the background. We have Yvette, that's actually very creative, the next fashion designer. She actually did not have any Christmas stuff, but she did have a blanket, which she made into a nice little hoodie. Next we have Emily, the nice light necklace and her Christmas spirit. We have Juan with the awesome T-Rex Christmas shirt and of course the Raiders hat. And last but not least, we have Jesus, who is dogging the camera looking like a gangster, straight up G on Christmas. Great job, Jesus. So once again, thank you guys all for submitting your photos. I love the school spirit. Keep it up, and you guys are only 3 days away from getting a homework pass. And if you guys do it all week long, I might even throw in an extra surprise. So keep it up. And the last announcement for today is you guys have no homework. Alright, so yesterday we started to talk about the call for war. And this call for war was going to be against the British. And the reason being was a lot of people started to think that the British were the ones behind it. And it wasn't about the Native Americans. The British were the ones influencing the Native Americans. And they're the ones that need to be stopped. So we started to talk about these people that were for the war. And they were called the War Hawks. Today I'm a war owl, as you can see. And the War Hawks, they were for the war, and they were also from the South. They said that the British people were the ones that are influencing the Native Americans. We need to stop them. The trade is going to be harmed by this. And if we don't do this, then our independence is going to be taken away. Also, we should go ahead and invade them in Canada because they keep trying to come and take our land. So let's go and invade them in Canada and take their land. On the opposition, we had the people, the Federalists from New England. And they said, no, we shouldn't be going to war. We need to be patient. We don't have the supplies. The British are way too powerful for us. And we need to become friendly with them because our economy depends on the trade with Britain. So we had all this. And then, unfortunately, James Madison elected into presidency. Of course, presidents always get kicked down with more problems. And he had to deal with this problem. It took him 4 years for them to decide what was going to happen, if we should go to war, if we should not go to war. Eventually, the War Hawks decided, or they were pushing him so much, pressuring him. Eventually we did end up going to war, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, let's go ahead and review what we learned yesterday. So your question was, what would you have done if you were to support the war against Britain? Explain yes or no. First off, Brandon doesn't think he would ever become a president, so later on in life, let's make sure that we vote for Brandon to become president, because we all think he could become a president. Carolyn, don't forget, you still will be the first woman president. But it was pretty interesting. reading some of your responses, a lot of you would not go to war, except for two of you. Two of you, I think it was two at the time I made this video. Two of you guys said you wanted to go to war. First off, Bryant. I don't know what's wrong with Bryant. I think he's been playing too many shooting games. He always wants to go to war. I think he wanted to go to war last time. And surprisingly, Norma said that she would want to go to war as well. But you guys had some great examples of why you would want to go to war and why wouldn't you. Some of the common answers that you guys said for not going to war. For example, Gabriel, he would not support the war, and Gabriel mentioned that the reason why he wouldn't support the war is because Great Britain was still a powerful country, which is true. Another reason was because the US was struggling with money and it would put us more in debt than before. That's also true. And he also we shouldn't make enemies, and he said that we should try, since we're a big country, we should try to help them and become allies one time. So that was a good proposal, Gabriel. I like that, becoming friends because we're both big and powerful countries. And then I'm sorry I missed, but Carrie also said she would want to go to war. So this is why Carrie said she wanted to go to war. She would want to go to war because she wanted to stop the British influences among the Native Americans. She would also want to invade Canada to gain more land, and she thought British wouldn't have won because we are still powerful. So good job, Carrie, having some pride in the U.S. And it sounds like you for sure were a war hawk. So if you had any of those answers, something along those lines, you guys were correct. So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the beginning or the early battles of the War of 1812 and how the US actually held their own against the British because the British were a little bit too distracted. But we're going to talk about those battles today, so let's get into it. So today we are going to talk about the War of 1812. Angered against Great Britain's actions finally provoked the United States into the War of 1812. Great Britain's great navy gave it a clear advantage at sea, but the wars were also fought on several other fronts, such as the land and everything like that. Victories in major battles along the frontier gave the Americans a new sense of unity. So in the summer of 1812, the United States found itself in war with one of the most powerful nations in the world, which was Great Britain at the time. These Warhawks thought it was going to be an easy fight. They thought it was going to be quick and easy because we're just America. We're going to take over everyone. But despite those claims by the Warhawks, the War of 1812 was not a really quick and easy fight as they thought it would be. It was actually a long and brutal fight, and we'll get into those early battles today. So when the war began, the British Navy had hundreds of ships. And in contrast, the United States Navy had fewer than 20 ships. So the British Navy was huge in comparison to the United States. And our Navy wasn't as powerful as the great British warships. These warships were huge and massive compared to our warships. Like we saw the US Constitution. It was not a really big warship, but we had tactics. So most of the British Navy ships, however, they were scattered all over the globe because Britain were fighting a bunch of different wars. They were fighting a war with France. They were fighting other wars along the sea. They were still worried about all these other things that they had their ships all over the place. So even though the US Navy was small, they were really well trained and these sailors were powerful. And these new warships, such as the USS Constitution, was quicker and faster, and they were able to take on and defeat these British ships. So American vessels, or these ships, they defeated British ships several times in one-on-one duels. So in a one-on-one battle with American ships, it was easy because the US ships were faster, they were more trained, and they had more skills. So these victories at the very beginning, they embarrassed the British, and when the British became embarrassed, the American morale or the American spirit went up, and they thought, just like in the last time when we fought the American Revolution, we can take on these British. They're not as big and bad as we think they are. We just have to outsmart them like we did before. So when the British lost these battles, they became really embarrassed, and they started to bring in these Navy ships, more and more Navy ships, and they started to block off all these different American seaports or all their trading areas, and they started to just own these areas because they were jealous and embarrassed of them losing at sea against these smaller and not as powerful, or so they thought, US ships. So the American leaders, they hoped to follow up these victories at sea with this invasion of Canada. Because they were taking over the battles in the water, they said, all right, let's go ahead and invade Canada now, because remember, that was one of their reasons, just like Carrie wanted. So 3 of the attacks were planned, and these attacks were planned on Detroit, from the Niagara Falls and up from the Hudson River Valley into Montreal. So these pretty much these rivers that lead from New York into Canada. The attack from Detroit failed though when the British soldiers and Indians led by Tecumseh, who was going to try to get his revenge, captured Fort Detroit. The other American attacks failed when the state militia refused to cross the Canadian border, and they're arguing that we can't cross the Canadian border because if we cross the border, then we are no longer fighting in America, and we're starting to fight in Canadian territory, and that's something that we did not want to do. We did not want to go and fight in foreign land because that could just lead into other things, possibly even a battle with Canada at the time. So with the Americans not really wanting to fight in Canada, they wanted to just fight along the Canadian border. They decided that in 1813, the United States went on attack again. Their key goal was to break Great Britain's control of Lake Erie, which is one of the 5 Great Lakes up by Michigan and Chicago and Minnesota area. The Navy gave the task to this guy. His name was Oliver Hazard Perry. And after building a small fleet, Perry sailed out to meet the British on September 10th, and this began the Battle of Lake Erie. This battle, it was a fierce battle, but it ended when the British surrendered. Actually, the Americans attacked them, and they caught the British off guard that they had to surrender. Perry sent out a message to General William Henry Harrison, and this message stated, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." Perry's brilliant victory forced the British to withdraw, giving the U.S. Army control of the lake and a new hope. So this battle in this lake, when the Americans won, it gave them a sense of hope once again, because they're starting to realize we can take on these British. We just have to be faster, think smarter, and attack them in different ways, because just because you're big and powerful doesn't mean we can take you down. There's always other ways. This last battle along the Canadian border was the Battle of the Thames River. Not Thanos, Thames. Alright, so with the Americans in control of Lake Erie, General Hudson marched his army into Canada. So now that they had a fort and they had a little area to come back, they decided, let's go ahead and go into Canada. At the Battle of Thames River on October 1813, he defeated a combined force of British troops and Native Americans. So Harrison's victory ended the British power in the Northwest. So the U.S. were just marching on through the British, mostly because the British were kind of had their hands tied with other battles, and they kind of underestimated them. But a lot of these little battles started to give these Americans hope, and this time they were able to defeat the British and the Native Americans. So during this battle, also Tecumseh, he actually died fighting, and this also had a huge blow to the British alliance with the Native Americans, because when Tecumseh died, all the Native Americans were saying, well, now who do we follow? Because we don't like the British. You're not our real leaders. Tecumseh was our leader, and we were fighting because he was in this. So this started to get the Native Americans thinking, like, maybe we shouldn't align ourselves with Britain because they're kind of just using us. Tecumseh, he gave us a reason to fight, but now he's gone, we don't know if we should continue to fight. So while all these battles were going on up north and at the Canadian border, there was also bloody wars going on in the south. And in the south, these Native Americans, they're called the Creek Indians. They were super angry with the American settlers because they were pushing into their lands, and they began to take up arms, and they started to fight them beginning in 1813. So a large force attacked Fort Mims on the Alabama River, destroying the fort and killing close to 250 of its defenders. So the Native Americans kind of caught them off guard, and they're like, what the heck? I thought Tecumseh was the only one that was trying to fight. But now with all these other Native Americans coming, they started to have a little problem with the Americans, and they actually won, killing a lot of people. So in response, the commander of the Tennessee militia, Andrew Jackson, which you see right there, who is going to be one of the presidents soon. I think he's on the $20 bill. He gathered about 200 or 2,000 volunteers, and he moved into the Creek Nation and said, we got to take down these Native Americans, and we're going to use this militia. So in the spring of 1814, Jackson attacked the Creek along the Tallapoosa River in Alabama, and Jackson's troop, they actually won this battle because they were just more powerful, and they had a lot more weapons than these Native Americans, because not a lot of these Creek Indians were still getting supplies from the British at the time. So Jackson's troops, they won this battle, and this battle was called the Battle of the Horseshoe Bend. And when this happened, the Treaty of Fort Jackson was later signed, and it ended this Creek War, and typically when a treaty is signed, there's always gonna be one person that's gonna get the bigger end of the stick, and you know who it is. This time it is the Americans, of course. And the Americans, they won, and they forced the Creek to give up millions of acres of their land. So when they won this battle, it's kind of like a broken record. Native Americans attack the Americans defeat the Native Americans, and then the Americans force them to sign a treaty which gives them all the land. And that's pretty much what happened. The Creek Indians lost this war, and we're just gaining more and more land, what's going to lead us more into our conquest or an expansion into the West. So as a quick review, we talked about a bunch of early battles, and a lot of them were really successful for the Americans. They were able to defeat the British at the sea because the British were too distracted, and they had Navy ships all over the place. We were able to win we won 2 of the 3 battles at the Canadian border, and the most important thing that we did was we got in charge of Lake Erie, which gave us a chance to go ahead and invade Canada. When we invaded Canada, we actually killed the leader Tecumseh. And when Tecumseh died, a lot of the Native Americans didn't know if they should be loyal to the British anymore because they were loyal to Tecumseh. And with him gone, they didn't know what to do because they realized that the British were also taking advantage of them. While that was all going on, there was also a battle in the South with the Creek Indians. And this time we had a Tennessee general named Andrew Jackson, who was going to become the president in a little bit. He decided that even though we took a little hurt in the very beginning, I'm going to create this militia of 2,000 men, and we're going to defeat the Creek Indians. And eventually they did. And when they defeated them, they made them sign this treaty called the Treaty of Fort Jackson, which kicked the Creek Indians out of their territory. And now the Americans gained a million more acres of land. And don't forget, an acre is about the size of a football field. So for homework, I want you guys to answer these questions. Number 1, what were the U.S. Navy's strengths and weaknesses early in the war? So you can make a list of strengths and weaknesses if you like, or just answer in a complete sentence or statement. Number 2, what role did the American Indians play in the West? So what did these American Indians play in the West? If you are confused, the American Indians were the ones that were fighting with the Creeks. Okay, those were the American Indians. Those are the Creek Indians. Number 3, why do you think many of the wars of the early battles took place along the Canadian border? So why do you think they were fighting along the border of Canada? Just think about what was in Canada. Think about their idea or their motivation to go to Canada. So why do you think all these battles took place on the Canadian border? To give you an additional hint for number 3, you also remember that the British soldiers were also in charge of Canada, and that's where a lot of them were used to supply the Native Americans with the guns and material. So Canada was ran by Britain at the time as well. Alright, so that was today's lesson. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, be sure to send me a message and I can go ahead and help you out. Today is Animal Day, so send me a picture of you and your animals, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow, Thursday, which is Sports Day. So I know a lot of you guys have sports jerseys, so I'm looking forward to see what kind of sports jerseys you guys have. So if you have no questions, I'll see you guys all tomorrow.